This week, Tolga Kayas joins us from Invicti Security to talk web asset discovery. Then John Lucades joins us from Eclipsium to talk risk trade-offs in firmware security. Finally, in the security news, JumpCloud raises $159 million on a $2.5 billion valuation. BitSight raises $250 million on a $2.5 billion valuation. And Sneak raises $300 million on an $8.5 billion valuation. Numbers don't mean anything anymore. DisruptOps, Accurix, and Neustar get acquired. China copies and pastes GDPR. The U.S. is looking for feedback on zero trust. Palo Alto Networks enters the consumer IoT market. Ransomware protection built into SSDs. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Did you know that 81% of data breaches are caused by weak password security? Keeper Security's easy-to-use password manager platform keeps your passwords safe, easy to share, and out of reach of cybercriminals. Keeper is the leading cybersecurity platform for preventing password-related data breaches and cyber threats. Check out Keeper and get a free 3-year Keeper Password Manager solution when you take a demo of Keeper for Business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Keeper Security.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 242, recorded on Wednesday, September 15th, 2021. I'm Adrian Sanabria, and for some reason, I'm doing what Paul usually does. Welcome, Paul.
Yay! I love it when I can have other people do my previous jobs for me. That's the sign of success in my mind. It should be for everyone else as well.
So yeah, I'm the main host now, and you're nice enough to give me kind of a soft handoff here. You know, you're seeing me into the door as you go out.
That's it. It was advice I got like a long time ago when I was in college. If you can train yourself out of a job, you'll have a wonderful career.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I've seen what happens when you do the opposite, and
it's bad.
It's not pretty. Welcome, Tyler Shields, co-host today as well.
Congratulations to you, my Captain O'Captain. I'll be following you wherever you go. I hope this doesn't promote me to the number 2 guy.
Well, no, because you're involved with the new thing that I'm going to be working on in lieu of this show.
Yes, and I hope to spend a lot of time helping with that. That little, we'll keep that a secret squirrel for a bit, but that's going to be a lot of fun as a project.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the reason here. You know, it's not that I do this better than Paul. You know, I'd like to think. Yeah, I'm not terrible at this, but no, Paul is a very cool project coming up, and I'm really excited to see it and to check it out when that's ready.
Yeah, I don't get less podcasts. I just get new podcasts.
Yeah.
Then I pass the baton and I go create a new podcast.
Yeah, new day, chop wood, carry water, right?
Yep.
All right, Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person. Still planning on in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our speakers, Leslie Carhart, John Strand, Alyssa Miller, Dave Kennedy, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, Justin Kohler, Jay Bill. Do we really need to mention every single one? Trenton Ivey, Ryan Cobb. I mean, it's exciting. It's a lot of exciting folks. You know, I hope things are looking better by December. and we are still able to do that in person because I'm emotionally invested. I want in-person conferences again. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our Rockstar lineup. All right, this interview is sponsored by Invicti Security, makers of the well-known AppSec products Acunetics and NetSparker. And we are joined today by Tolga Kayas, Assistant Application Security Manager at Invicti, to talk a bit on a topic that Paul and I have recently spent some serious time on, discovering and keeping track of your web assets. Tolga, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for hosting me. By the way, you are better than Paul.
There you go.
Oh, man. You folks can't hear it, but Tyler was talking so much smack. So smack talk just, that's
right.
The whole 10, 15 minutes before we go live today, for whatever reason, is just all smack talk.
You deserve the compliment, right?
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I'll take it. So Tolga, how did you get into security, and what drew you to doing OSINT research?
Yeah, actually, before I go into the security, I was dealing with some intelligence and intelligence researchers. So that was the main topic drew to me to OSINT, and OSINT was the topic that drew into me to cybersecurity. So that's all how it started.
Oh, that's an interesting route into security. It's a very, very good route into security. There's lots of intelligence to explore, right? Has it been shocking to find how many organizations really have no clue what they've got exposed to the public internet and in the public space?
Yeah, the most shocking thing for me was even some security organizations has some flaws with it, especially with the documentation leaks. So after I saw such things, that was the really shocking part. So that's where I started investing some consultation and OSINT and asset discovery into the Invicti, which before me they were doing it. So it's a great thing to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And I found this really interesting because, you might not be aware of this, but earlier this year, we actually did some reviews of attack surface management products that, where the whole purpose of the product is to go out and find all the abandoned stuff and web properties, artifacts, digital artifacts out there that companies are unaware of, especially ones that could cause them some pain, cause them some issues in the future. So it's, at the rate some of these companies build and create web applications, it's, I guess, unsurprising, that some of them get abandoned, forgotten about. It seems like attackers definitely look to those to get initial footholds into companies. So for companies that have already kind of dug themselves down in a deep hole with this respect, don't have that visibility, don't know what they don't know, where should they start, Tolga?
Yeah, this was one of the topics I would like to talk about. Would you mind if I share my screens to express myself better?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Tolga you have like 10 slides or so that kind of walk through this problem and solution.
Share it. Okay.
Sweet.
So, as we talked, I know this topic has been talked multiple times, and practices are well known by fellow OSINTers. CTOs know. They need to know what assets they have. Security engineers know. They have to do recon just like attackers do, or do they? So, as a consultant, I thought it was my responsibility to bring this topic to the table again after what I saw in the industry as we speak, and especially in the large-sized businesses. So these days, each enterprise develops hundreds of web applications and components every single year, if not thousands. Campaign applications, portals, interfaces for desktop applications, and more every year. Some cloud natives, SPA, statics, doesn't matter really for in the beginning. And we shouldn't care about their technology stack first. Their purpose, if they are temporary or not important at all. And as part of the application security in enterprises, we do DAST, SAST, SCA, IST, penetration testing, bug bounty programs, all of them to achieve one thing, right? Secure applications. We are aware that all of them has to be secure, but the game's name is simple. You can protect what you are not aware of, right? And some deployments will be lost in time. Others will go wild with high severity vulnerabilities. Legacy or unknown web assets in the wild create a significant risk to organizations because organizations will stop maintaining them. However, attackers will not stop finding new vulnerabilities. At these times, it's getting even worse because we are developing multiple complex web applications on one web server. So even if we discover that website, the web server, this doesn't mean we found and covered all web applications hosted under the same FQDN. So discovering web application was challenging before, and it got even more challenging. And if you're a large-sized organization, you will miss some applications. It's a fact. So what is the solution? And we mainly found two solutions to address this and minimize the risks associated with it. First, internal processes and policies for launching a new asset. This will create a centralized baseline on how teams will deploy new assets. Secondly, web asset discovery. If you're not already practicing centralized policies and processes, this means finding all web applications not included in application security practices. If you already have the centralized practices in place, you will find all assets you may have missed. And let's start the internal processes and policies for launching a new asset. And honestly, this is where discovering assets should start. It should be a requirement to register all web assets directly to your security solutions to start application security from the beginning, instead of discovering web applications you created, register them. Believe me, it's much easier. So where to start your asset discovery? Web asset discovery, it's a process of finding all web applications externally and internally. And it is easy to tell than do it. When it is easier to tell, it will take a lot of time to touch each topics one by one. So I will be touching topics very briefly and give some keywords for you to understand general concepts and preferably do it yourself. And let's understand what we can do for external assets. For external assets, we have lots of data, but not much information. So you might feel lost. Where you can start then? As a starter, we already have a list of our mission-critical websites. We all know our subsidiaries, sub-agencies, and so on. This is a great place to start, right? First of all, list all of them and first query in the public data sets. Search public crawlers for root domain, use your SSL certificate in certificate transparency data, and finally check public DNS data to move to open source intelligence techniques. And use search engines, right? Craft your specific docs for your environment, documentations, concepts, then move to internet search engines. I prefer not to name, but we all know the actors for internet search engines. So use them. They're great for manual approaches of the web asset discovery. If you have that opportunity, make sure you use third-party data providers. They will do most of the job for you and provide the data. And let's continue with the discovering internal assets. The first step to begin with is configuration checks, that you access to security appliances and analyze configs. In cloud era, internal assets usually do not mean internal assets. This means they might not be publicly available, but also not on-premise. This brings a challenge along with a great opportunity. For on-premise, most likely not everything is centrally manageable. This is a different story in cloud. You have control over everything centrally, which means you can use that control to analyze configurations automatically to discover new assets. And for on-premise, it is more challenging to discover. First, you will need to know what you have as security appliances, and then you can check their configurations to discover new ones. After completing configuration checks, the next step that works excellent for on-premise is the service scans. Just like an attacker does, start standardized scanners and scan the IP ranges, detect the HTTP services, and query IP for PTR records. And like I said, it is easy to tell than actually doing it. And I bet everyone understands better now why it is better to register the assets instead of finding them in the wild. And what we can offer to help. The first thing what we can offer is automated and continuous web asset discovery, which is included in our product line as Invicti. It is essential because what we need with asset discovery is finding every web application, not just the web server or one FQDN. This is where automated and continuous discovery comes into the picture, because it requires a lot of man-hour to finding each and every web applications manually. As we are talking about web asset discovery in application security, what we do in our platform, getting inputs from you, like your most critical applications, using that input on our databases and provide you with associated assets. And then you can add that application in your inventory quickly, start test scans, and with that input again, the platform will keep finding even more associated assets. As a second service is manual discovery as part of the additional services. Before I jump into it, I would like to explain what we do at Invicti. We are developing the largest dynamic application security solutions, Akunetics and NetSpark. And as application security management team, we are providing white glove solutions to our customer on dynamic application security and consulting on how they improve their DevSecOps. We have a service called Guided Success, which is highly skilled penetration testers and project managers help you to use our platforms or even use the platform on your behalf. And as part of the Guided Success service, we will be doing manually discovering our clients' web applications. Since it's a manual approach, it has much more specialized techniques and tailored for the customer. And it has much more coverage, though. And what do you think, Paul? If you were a customer, would you use a service like this?
Yeah, absolutely, I would. I think I've seen this not implemented well. I've seen some good intentions. In other words, maybe I set up a bug bounty program, and this is part of my bug bounty program, but that I think is the wrong usage of your bug bounty program. I've always pushed for organizations to do this internally. And I think some of the other ways, like it's kind of misguided, is, well, I'll just leave that to my pen testers, right? When I come into a pen test, usually that's one of the first things in a pen test, depending on how it's scoped, is to find all of your potential targets. And that's when a lot of these websites will be uncovered. And I think in both examples, it's better than doing nothing. I like these processes to be internalized in the organization. Certainly outsourced to a service like yourselves is a perfect way to do it. And then integrate that with my operational security program is the best. I don't want to wait for a bug bounty hunter or a pen tester to find a site I don't know about it. I want that scan to run or investigation, I should say, to be ongoing. And outsourcing it to a service like yourselves, I think, is great. I'd do it.
Hey, Adrian, real quick question for you. Does this start to bridge the gap towards like attack surface management?
Yeah, no, I think certainly the automated piece does fit in here, and a lot of those folks also have kind of like a white glove approach to it. Where there is kind of some assistance component, some services component, but a lot of things I think are really important. All coming together to help with this problem that have been mentioned here. Like if somebody's going to come to you and let you know about a problem, you need to be prepared for that. So that's generally considered like a prerequisite to doing a bug bounty, having a vulnerability disclosure program, making it clear where to send that email, where, who to get in touch with to let them know that you've found an issue on one of their web properties or whatever it might be. And then to Tolga's point about doing this, and Paul's point about doing this internally, you really need to do both. You need to have that discovery piece to find the stuff that falls through the cracks, but you also need the process to make sure all new apps are getting registered. Shadow IT is kind of gone unsolved. I mean, we've seen tools that help with it, but a lot of companies still have these issues. Still haven't put these processes into place and worked out a lot of this stuff.
Hey. So Tolga, I have a quick question for you. Talk to me a little bit about the difference between informed or internal collection of this type of data versus external collection of this type of data. Do you find value differences between the two? And what do you like to bring to your customers there?
I think I couldn't understand the question fully. So what do you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, let me reiterate. Right, there's a certain level of data collection from an outside vantage point to the business, right? So collecting DNS records, collecting access entry points into web applications, collecting lists of externally facing ports, things like that, versus a more informed approach, which would be, hey, let's take my cloud security or my cloud provider, my cloud service provider in a general sense, and take the credentials to that and enumerate from a inside view, meaning we have authenticated credentials to the infrastructure and can collect data. What are your thoughts on the differences between the two and value of the two?
I prefer both, but at end of the day, you need to use both. So just like an attacker do, you will need to act on your own, collecting the data from outside. And if you're doing the same thing from the inside, also working great, because you have the control over everything, right? You have the credentials, you have the configurations, you can see the more things. And if you think from the more pre-production side, you wouldn't have much control over that in the external phase, but you have that control in the internal phase. But so combining both works great. That's my thing.
Yeah, I mean, there was a good point about cloud can be easy because it's just an API call. It'll tell you everything that's in there. If you know about that particular cloud account, if it's an authorized account, but developers, can and will absolutely go off and use their personal GitHub, or maybe they decide to use DigitalOcean, like a different cloud provider or something like that. And I think that's where some of these other techniques, like using DNS and things like that to discover, again, kind of those shadow IT cases where, somebody doesn't use, maybe the process is really inconvenient for them to get, access to deploy stuff in the cloud and to use the cloud, so to get their work done quicker, they use their own personal account or something like that. So I think, definitely you need a bunch of different techniques to be able to discover that kind of stuff. Would you agree with that? Tolga?
For me, yeah. Yeah, for me, yeah. You will need both.
And talking about the product specifically, do Acunetics and NetSparker kind of share the same software piece here? Is this an additional charge, or is it included with both products?
Yeah, both included with the both products, and we have a centralized database for it. So for every customer, you can use that service, and after adding one target, or even with your registry email, it will start finding assets of yours.
I love how you simplify it there. You already know an email address, so why not start there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And since you already know a few targets of yours, few applications of yours, the most critical websites, you will immediately start them you will be starting to scan them immediately. And with that input with us, we will use that in our databases and sending the results back to you for the discovered new ones.
But there's no reason not to put other stuff that you know in there, right? Like that just helps the discovery engine to put in all the domains, that you know about, to give it, I guess, some seeds for doing that discovery. What kind of what data types does it take as seeds? What can you feed this discovery engine?
Mm-hmm. We can feed with the domains, just domains, and this is more acting like the keywords. You can add keywords, organization names for the SSL certificates, and you can give a IP address or IP addresses in range format. So it will scan all of them in the databases, and it will give the results back to you. In 5 minutes, you have a list of your most of your targets, and what you can do is just selecting the right ones for you and adding them to your DAST tool and scan. It is that easy. And
do you find that false positives are an issue with this, and how do you deal with those, if so?
Yeah, false positive is inevitable. So you will have some false positive in any asset discovery. You will find some, but the most possible way to eliminate most of them is using the SSL certificates, because I found them very valuable for it, because you already know the organization names, and you can basically use that data to cover all of the associated web assets, and even you can eliminate the others with it. So even with that, you will have a great amount of true positives in it.
So certificates are key, it sounds like.
Yeah, for most of it.
And so current customers, how do they get access to this engine? Is it distributed as SaaS, separate from the products, the Acunetics and NetSparker products themselves?
Yeah, it exists, and we have a centralized service for it as SaaS. And our customers can just add their website, and they will see the result in their dashboard, even it's on-premise, but the solution itself for our discovery service, it's centralized, based and managed by us.
Paul, Tyler, either of you have any other questions?
No, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate the coverage, the direction of the product. The more that we can get that data collected and available, the better it's going to be from a security perspective. So it's interesting.
Tolga, I did have a question. Are you providing screenshots when you discover a website? Because that's usually how, when I conduct a pen test or an assessment, right, I string a bunch of open source tools together and end up with like a web page of here's all the web pages that I found, and here's a screenshot. I'm assuming that's included in the product as well.
Not yet, but I will definitely discuss with my product team.
Yeah, I find that
after a scan, we provide the screenshot, but not with the discovery service.
I gotcha. Yeah, so you do that with the scan.
Gotcha.
Yeah, which is totally fair.
Yeah, when you're doing discovery and you get like 400 results back, it does help to have those screenshots, because sometimes it's like 13 different QA and dev versions of the same site, right?
Or that one's a VPN concentrator that happens to have remote exploit.
Right. Yeah, an internal pen test, it's always fun to see all the like the Dell storage.
We used to call it DRAC. Yeah.
You always see a whole bunch of those. Yep. Excellent. Tolga, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, not for now.
Excellent. So very good stuff. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Invicti to learn more, and stay tuned. We've got John Lucchese from Eclipsium coming up next.
The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium. Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Discover hidden network threats, automate security investigations, and optimize security workflows to stay a step ahead of attackers with Gigamon Threat Insight. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Of course you do. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, and follow us on our newest live streaming platform, Twitch, where we occasionally get rated, and it's very exciting. All right. This interview is sponsored by Eclipsium. You can learn more by visiting securityweekly.com/Eclipsium. Joining us today is John Lucades, VP Federal Technology at Eclipsium, frequent Security Weekly host. I can't even remember if I've been on the same show with you, John, but I know I've watched you on several shows. I think maybe on Paul's Security Weekly. And this is one of my favorite topics, the often overlooked attack surface of device firmware. Welcome back to the show, John.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be here, and I always have fun with all of you guys. So I'm very pleased to be, here with you, Adrian, today. So thanks.
You'll be hard pressed to stump John with firmware related questions.
Oh, are we going to play Stump the Chump?
I was thinking
that'd be very funny.
And in our prep calls, we try and tune our interviews right for the audience. Yeah. We're here on Enterprise Security Weekly, but John, I get so nerdy, and that's when I ask all my questions, like John, how does EFI work?
Yeah,
we get really nerdy.
Right. There's always something new to learn about this space because it's also changing. And that's why you will actually succeed if we try that. And it will be hilarious for everyone.
Right. But what's
we'll try that sometime.
What's interesting too, we're kidding a little bit, but also things at the firmware level are meant to kind of be out of the user's purview, right? Because John and I were talking about how when you enable Microsoft updates and you do the other, I forget what Microsoft calls it, other driver updates. I'm John, are those always driver updates? Sometimes they're actually firmware updates because they've tried to take this away from the user because we don't want to have to worry about it until we do.
Magic, it's updated now. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
It sometimes works.
It's part of the problem in this space, right? Is this stuff has always been designed to, no, you don't have to worry about that. We'll take care of that behind the scenes, except they don't a lot of the time.
Right.
Right.
And the tough part is that if you think about how your enterprise architecture is set up, you are expecting to manage certain things, and you may actually be under some contractual obligation to deal with certain kinds of issues in a timeline to always keep things up to date. And so you're expecting to be able to see a certain level of detail. But the premise of firmware was that you don't need to worry about that level of detail. But that's a fallacy. It's this idea that some software is different from other software and doesn't have the same problems that every other piece of software has. And that makes no sense, right? What's actually going on is that there's some set of software that we have chosen not to think about, and we call it firmware. And that firmware is something that's controlled almost entirely by a manufacturer, and you just don't get to see into it. It's a black box to you, and you assume that they're taking care of it, right? But you have no real visibility into that, and that's the problem. But if you really think about it, every one of us, everyone in the audience too, already knows about this problem. This isn't some new weird thing that I just came up with yesterday. it's something that you knew about and has been in the back of your mind for a long time. And what we're starting to see is that people have been expressing that in various forms. We've seen now some studies from both Microsoft and HP that are showing over 80% of people either have experienced, in the case of the Microsoft study, a firmware attack, or in the case of the HP study, they're worried about it. They believe that the risk is significant to their organization. And why is that? You're kind of looking at, you just look around you and you're seeing all of these network devices, VPN concentrators being attacked, being exploited. And a lot of times you have no heads up, you have no warning. It's a 0 day for you. And, the manufacturer comes out with something, on Friday at 5 o'clock. And now we're working holiday weekends just to get things patched.
John, I have a question for you. Do you own your own private island?
I would love to.
Right?
That's my goal in life.
And where I'm going with that is, if all these companies, like let's say they surveyed thousands of companies, know they have the problem and they did something about it, and maybe they bought your product, you might own your own private island. But I think where we are is all these companies
I was wondering where you're going with that.
All these companies know they have a problem to some varying degree, but most of them aren't doing really much about it, right?
That's right.
That's kind of where I feel like we're at.
I do feel like that's where we've been for a long time. I'm hoping that's changing. And in fact, frankly, that's my mission, right? Like that's the whole point of me doing this whole Eclipsium thing.
Right. And when you get your own private island, I'm angling for an invite. That's all.
I'm definitely, I want you to have the show there. Yes. We should totally just like take a weekend and just do this together. I'm in totally. But like, we were, when I started out on this space, I was interested in it. Like it's an intellectual thing. I'm into hacking stuff. And I thought, dude, I can get underneath everything and just bypass all of it. And so I was interested, right? But the point is that you don't have to know all of that stuff. You don't have to get interested and geek out over all of these things. It should be something that you can manage with a process that is just like every other process you've got, right? That's the premise of Eclipsium. And it's really not rocket science, to be honest. It's sort of like, that thing you're doing with every other piece of software, you probably need to do it here too.
Yeah. And I also think that the interesting thing is when we as nerds like work with firmware, it's usually because of two reasons. One, we're trying to make something work as it's intended, and we got to do a firmware update to make that happen. Or we're trying to make something work as it's not intended, and we're either trying to hack it and get malware on it, or make that device do something, like I said, that wasn't intended. Like we hack firmware on routers and things like that to be able to put our own custom software on it.
That's all it is. You're right. And it's funny because it feels like it's some black art, right? Something that, nobody knows, and it's secret, and it's sort of special, but it's totally the same software stuff that you've seen everywhere else. Half of the devices that I've looked at is when I've gone down to it's just Linux. Yep. And it's some special build for maybe a PowerPC or an ARM or whatever. We've seen 1,000 of those. I mean, you've seen 1,000 of those, Paul.
It's not that mysterious, right?
It's not that mysterious, exactly. And if you want to go deeper, go for it. You go get the data sheet for that ARM SoC, right? Go look at what registers they're doing, figure out how it configures the board. It's going to be less mysterious than you think once you start figuring out what it's doing. Computers are just computers, right? Like they do the same stuff. There's a way to configure it. It either did or didn't do it right. There's some stuff that people usually forget, but that's actually what the problems sort of gravitate toward. And as we're starting to look at things like zero trust architectures, all that really means is that all those things that you were ignoring before, that you were just taking for granted, those are the trusted things. Well, you're trying to not trust them. You're trying to zero trust them, right? So a zero trust architecture, a lot of times is really about device security and being able to know a way to verify that this device is actually in its correct state.
Going back to where we start at the top of the interview, where these are processes and computing devices that we really shouldn't have to worry about. How prevalent is auto-updating some of these various firmware updates? And then, but like, you're not done, because Windows has auto-updating, but we still hack into Windows PCs. But I still feel like we're not quite there yet with firmware. We're
so not there yet. We're trying. I mean, like you did mention in the early part. At first, by the way, I thought that you were going to go back to geeking out, and we could do that. But the thing that you probably have seen before, and I know you mentioned it, Paul, is in Windows Update, you get that little optional updates, little drop down thing, and it can show you stuff. Sometimes you'll see a firmware update in there. That is cool. That's a huge monster step for this industry that we've never been doing before. Now we're starting. And it has all the sort of things that come with starting. And sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it tells you to install the thing you just installed. Sometimes it's, not really the latest version. Okay, but it's better than we were. But notice that that's just the system firmware for running on Windows. On Linux, there's another project, and props to Richard Hughes if he's listening. LVFS is the Linux firmware updater, and they actually have one now, and it's a thing, and people use it, and it's actually built into a lot of the a lot of your distributions already. Very cool. But it has the same limitations. It's sort of like it's an opt-in. Some vendors participate with some models and not others. And so it's sort of a mess if you're looking at a large enterprise with a lot of systems, especially if they're not all the same system. Right. So this gets to be a struggle. And when we look at this, let's talk about patching, right? You can use those automatic update systems. But then if you manage a really production infrastructure that needs to be running, you start to worry about that. And you should, because that has broken, and it does break. So when that happens, you're going to be on the hook for another weekend to work through that and fix it. That sounds like just monumental risk. Yeah, and so what we've been doing is working with NIST. And NIST has a group inside of it, the NCCOE, the National Cyber Center of Excellence. And they're actually publishing these, what amount to how-to guides. I mean, you remember the old how-to guides and big text file and do this and this and this. They're actually naming these 1800 series publications where they're going to put all these products together, put it into a process, and actually explain to you how to set that up. And they have one on enterprise patching. Definitely would recommend for folks to take a look at that. Eclipsium's participating, and the premise of Eclipsium there is to get this firmware layer of stuff into the enterprise patching process, which it can be, but you do have to manage it.
Yeah, and where I think the struggle in the enterprise, from a somewhat nerdy perspective, but we started with operating system patches, right? So we got to get better at that, and largely we did. We got to get better at application I got to make sure the browser's up to date on everyone's computers, and we got better at that, arguably, over the years, right? But when you get down into, we've had to do this on the enterprise, and it's very similar, because the driver for your hardware that's associated with your operating system is different from your firmware updates. And now all four of these things have to be in line and work together. If I update the firmware, I got to make sure that the driver supports that, which the operating system has to support, which could impact the application. Any one of these things in the chain can break. Now you've got this matrix of four things you have to worry about in enterprise patching, which could be one of the reasons why people just sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah. And to add to that, for me, learning about firmware, I remember the first time I saw a talk on bad USB, where they're talking about doing malicious things with flash drive firmware. Just kind of opened my eyes, to the fact that these little guys have, are basically computers with their own RAM, their own flash, their own CPU and stuff like that. But then it's one of those things like learning about microbes. You start seeing them everywhere, and it's a bit overwhelming. Like you learn that a tiny micro SD card has firmware on it, and the average monitor is an x86 PC, basically. And the microphone I'm talking through right now gets firmware updates like once a week. My Jabra headset and the little dongle that I use for my Jabra headset get firmware updates. So it becomes kind of overwhelming. And where I'm going with this is how do you prioritize with that? If I've got PCs and systems from different manufacturers, like the process for Dell is going to be different from Lenovo, which is, different from, how do I do it on my Macs? At least with the Macs, it all comes from one, choke point, right? Like it all comes from Apple. But with some of these others, like they've got this really sketchy software they want you to use to do the firmware update that sometimes have vulnerabilities in them themselves.
It's a great problem that Eclipsium solves for you. Actually, right? I mean,
what was that?
I said it's a great problem. What Adrian just laid out as a problem statement is one of the reasons why you exist as a company at Eclipsium, right?
Absolutely. And let me take that in a couple pieces, because the reality is that is almost an intractable problem. Just like you've laid it out, it is that complicated and then some, because every time you dig a little bit deeper, you're going to find some more of those things, right? Take a look at your motherboard and just stop. Like it's game over. There's so many of these things on one board, and they all are running an operating system, and they all got applications on. Okay, I don't even want to know. That's actually the thing that has caused so many people to just think of firmware as an unsolvable problem. And that is exactly why we exist. We exist to be like, okay, no, it's not unsolvable. We're going to solve it, but we're not going to solve it all in one step. There's no silver bullet, none of that. Yes, we're going to have limitations too, but the reality is it comes back to that prioritization. And that was a great question, because how do you prioritize? Well, you could do it a lot of ways. If I were on some, high assurance system evaluation, I would be doing more of a failure analysis and looking at which failure modes actually are the most catastrophic. All right. And sort of prioritize the level of effort against how bad the outcome is. Okay, great. But that works for the very small scope of that specific thing. And not even that thing in this particular context where it's being used. If you have the ability to do that in your organization, awesome. That's puts you ahead of the game a lot. But usually, even in those cases, you have something that's around that. That's more of a regular IT problem. You have a normal enterprise with a normal computer. And at some point, it's going to devolve into what everyone else is doing. And that is where this blows up. That's where you can't really make these very specific priorities that are tailored to a very specific use case and mission. So in the broader world, we have to sort of look at a couple of sort of quick and dirty things. One of those is to look at what are attackers actually doing. And that involves keeping up with research. We kind of got a head start on that by being part of the research community ourselves. And that's why we sort of started all of this. But we have to keep up with it. And the research kind of moves into different areas. And as they move, it's usually followed by somebody who actually is going to do something malicious. So you start and you research something, and you learn about it, and then other people get the idea, hey, I should learn about that too. UEFI work this way. If you start to look at what's actually getting exploited, you'll see UEFI in there, but you're also going to see every single network device firmware. And like DHS, CISA, and some of these partner agencies across the world released a joint publication on the most routinely exploited CVEs for 2020, and then again in 2020. Yeah. Look at that. Look at 2020. How many of those were devices? 4. And in 2021, how many? 11. So it was 4 out of 12 and 11 out of 16. And you're really seeing an explosion of this sort of stuff. Why? for the obvious reasons that we all have been sort of dancing around. You're not looking at it. You don't have control of it. It's going to be broken. And so you end up in those bad situations again. So what Eclipsium is really doing is trying to go after those things that people can get to. They know how to get to them. They're not an insane amount of work to go figure out. And we're going to get those under control first. And then we're going to go get the next one and the next one and the next one. And iteratively, we're going to cover almost everything. Yeah, there'll be a limit at some point, but that's the premise for Eclipsium. And it's got to work in a way that's not specific to one device, because we're going to cover all the manufacturers. And that is kind of the fun part for me as a researcher, but it's this concept of a device profile. It's this idea that I don't need to know everything about everything. I need to know when it's behaving normally, and I need to find that abnormality when it happens.
But it also sounds like, John, that UEFI is a good place to start. I mean, even the acronym is universal, right? Which
yes,
conceivably, right? The process for controlling, placing controls around that should also be somewhat universal.
It's universal, and it's also underneath everything. It's the foundation upon which other things are going to be built. So an operating system security is dependent on what UEFI does. Mm-hmm. If UEFI fails to configure the platform properly, then the operating system cannot use the hardware features the way they were expecting to. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, it's a good place to start. It happens to actually have a standard, which also helps. Yep. So those sort of things make it work. There's also,
it is an operating. Essentially, UEFI is an operating system for all intents and purposes, right?
If you go to like a textbook definition, it's totally doing all those things, right? They're managing different things that execute modules. Mm-hmm. They're interfacing and creating an abstraction between the hardware. They just don't use all of the same features that normal operating systems use. They don't have memory protection usually. Mm-hmm. They don't, try to. Well, funny thing, it used to be that they didn't go and like create network connections, but that's not true anymore. Right. We had this recent BIOS disconnect thing you probably saw. Mm-hmm. They're actually installing firmware updates by going out to the internet, getting the update from the manufacturer's server, downloading it and installing it. Great, until you have remote code execution in that process.
Right.
But that's where we're heading, and we're adding features, so it's basically becoming more and more of an operating system.
Yeah. And what I find a nerdy side note on that is the monitor, mouse, and keyboard is sometimes not your interface to the UEFI system. The boards and hardware give the user some telemetry even before the system will actually recognize those other input and output devices.
Absolutely. And there's this whole sections of, and this is why UEFI is a nice starting point, because it's got a standard, because it's been around for a while, because it's in almost everything. Mm-hmm. You can now make these pretty accurate works on most devices statements about like, there's a certain time interval where up until in this phase of the boot, there are certain things that are expected, mm-hmm. certain things that are available. After this phase, they're supposed to be locked. After this phase, there's supposed to be different things that are available that you can depend on. And so that's nice, because now you can go and check stuff like that. You can start to say, it actually was supposed to work that way.
And there's, sorry, go
ahead. Question for you. Do you do the actual, so one frustration of mine, I'm currently, me and Paul are with Security Weekly Labs are doing network vulnerability scanning testing. And a lot of these scanners don't correctly identify some of these devices. For example, my network devices, every major scanner out there identifies as Debian 7. And I'm sure there are some components of Debian 7 in there, but this is a device where like you can get the manufacturer name from the MAC address. There's a proprietary service that if you query it, it will tell you exactly what model device it is.
Web interface.
It's got a web interface. Like there's 47 different ways to tell that this is not just a Debian server running on x86 or something like that. And it's so frustrating. So, I saw that you do have your own scanner product. Like, do you help with that device identification piece that seems to be so hard?
Actually, yes. Now, again, there's limits. We can't do everything under the sun. But what we did is, again, back to that prioritization, we focused in on those routinely exploited CVEs and those devices. And so we tried to get a profile for those things that are commonly exploited first. And when we do what amounts to a network fingerprint of those devices, we will try to actually identify enough information that we not only identify the device, but we also identify if it's in the vulnerable sort of version or configuration. And sometimes that's because we can scrape stuff and pull version numbers out. Sometimes that's more of a behavioral characteristics where you interact with it in a certain way and you know that it's version XYZ because they changed that after such and such version, right? And so a lot of these are more what you're talking about, where there are more tricks to it than just, the Nmap thing with, fingerprinting.
Right.
It gives you back Debian 7 for everything.
Yeah. Because I mean, so many things are running embedded Linux these days that's just not a useful technique anymore.
Useless. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And so here's the deal. Eclipsium is trying to actually fit into your organizational process. If you want to do research like what I like to do and sort of play around with, Paul and I will totally go to town on geeking out over it. But you get tools like, open source and Nmap, chipsec for the firmware and hardware stuff on an x86. That's all cool, but it's hard to fit that into a process. You're going to need like people and experts to actually go figure out what that's doing and what that implies in your process. What are you going to do about that? The reason for something like Eclipsium is to actually take that expertise and amortize it over all of our customers. You sort of do that once and you start to say, no, here's how it fits into the process. It goes like this. So run the network scan, find out what's around you, do that periodically. And every time you start connecting to one of these, vulnerable VPNs, we're going to let you know about that. And if there's something anywhere in your environment that happens to be one of these top, 15 or whatever CVEs, we're going to let you know about that. There's also going to be a profiling of your device that says, is your device behaving properly? And when it's interacting with all those other devices, we're going to know that this device communicates with that device and both of them are operating normally or not. So that's where you actually are talking about multiple processes in the organization. One of them is vulnerability management. We started off talking about patch management, and that's half of it. But the other half of it is incident response. It's like, I know there will be risks in the firmware of all of these devices. And no matter what I do, there will still be some left over. When something goes wrong, how are you going to know? And what are you going to do about it? That's the other side of what we're trying to handle.
Yeah, there's a lot of important pieces you're handling there. But, if I were to pick one that's most important, I think it is that prioritization piece. And I love that you mentioned ff0a and how they're kind of floating up these top 10, top 20 CVEs, because when I looked at that, it wasn't stuff that it wasn't stuff that I recognized or would have expected, even with the stuff that I, was familiar with. So I love that they're doing that because they've got some insight that we just don't see in our normal day-to-day news cycles and jobs. And I didn't know until the other day that Mirai was still a thing. And you look at the list of devices that make up.
That first happened.
Yeah,
what?
I know.
Still totally a thing. I mean, there's all variants.
It's setting new records.
Well, now there's a million.
It's setting new records for attacks. And you look at the list of devices that make that thing up, and I can guarantee you wouldn't guess 90% of them.
So or
maybe haven't even heard of them. Yeah.
Well, we did some research on some stuff like that too. And it's actually, I know exactly what you're talking about, because every time you go looking at what constitutes some of these botnets, you end up learning about new models of random things that somebody put out at some point in your life that you just totally missed. But that's the interesting thing that I think as a researcher, you need to build on other people's work. And you start to think of this stuff as sort of compounding. Well, that's what the attackers did too, right? Everybody built on top of Mirai because it was successful. It worked, and it worked well. And now you build on top of that, and you did some more, and you were more successful, or at least as successful. So why can't we do that on the defense side too? And there are some interesting lessons that you can learn as a defender, especially if you're trying to identify what's out there from the way that Mirai propagated. Mm. And so you can build those techniques into your network scanner too. And now even if it's not a specific model and version, that it's using a default password, right? And that it's configured stupidly, if you will, right?
Could we call that the low-hanging fruit approach?
The low-hanging fruit approach is not a bad start, right? And especially when we moved to a distributed working from home model, and you got out of the possibility of managing everything around you. That wasn't even a thing. So this is sort of the idea, is that when we're profiling a device as Eclipsium, we want to go deep into that device because that's our thing, that's the firmware. But what we wanted to do is learn from what's going on around us, look at stuff like these ff0a alerts, and say, well, okay, I should be looking around my device too. And I should be saying, is any of that around me? I really want to know about that if it's true,
Yeah. Well, John, I'm deeply jealous of the research you get to do, and very much looking forward to the next time we get to chat again. It seems like, this could go on for quite a while, but thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you for having me. Take a look at our website for an upcoming blog on just this topic, where we're going to be talking about those ff0a alerts and how much this is affecting device firmware. So I'm always very happy to be on your show. So thank you again for having me.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Eclipsium to learn more. And of course, their blog, as John mentioned, some good stuff there. And next up, we go over the latest enterprise security news. So stay tuned.
Whether your biggest cybersecurity concern is ransomware, unprotected network devices, zero trust success, or auditing your supply chains, firmware security is critical. Eclipsium's enterprise firmware security platform helps you identify devices and their firmware, verify the integrity of firmware wherever it's used, and fortify firmware through active remediation and automated patching. Visit securityweekly.com/Eclipsium to try out Eclipsium or learn more about enterprise firmware security. Wide-scale adoption of cloud applications, an increase in remote workers, and expansion of branch offices has rendered the centralized, on-premises security model impractical. Enter Cisco Umbrella. Umbrella now includes secure web gateway, firewall, and cloud access security broker functionality, plus integration with Cisco SD-WAN, all delivered from a single cloud security service. It helps businesses of all sizes secure their network and extend protection to roaming users and branch offices. Security doesn't have to be complicated. Get simple, smart, and powerful security with Cisco Umbrella. Visit securityweekly.com/Cisco Umbrella to learn more. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. ExtraHop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on Digital Pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. And just a quick note, that conference has gone to virtual. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And now on to the Enterprise Security Weekly news, which we missed a week last week, so I went a bit nuts here.
Mm-hmm. Adrian, I'd like to start with Jump Cloud.
Go for it.
I think it's interesting if you haven't read the book Play Bigger, you should definitely read the book Play Bigger.
Adding it to the list.
I'm not sure that's limited, Tyler, to any specific audience, right? Like, I just think it's one of the best business books out there.
Yeah, it's a general business book that I would highly recommend. We had to read it in business school when I went through. They put it on the mandatory reading list, and it's one of those things where it's like you can get a lot out of it as an entrepreneur, a founder, all the way up through, a marketer, or even someone who's building a product in a general sense. Very valuable content.
Great summary. And in that book, they talk about the category king. And when we think about directory services, Microsoft is the category king. And I'll tell you what, a very large category king in this category, right? I think there's different levels, you should dig into the book of category kings. And how do you displace a king that is that large and has that much market share? I think that's where Jump Cloud is going, judging by the funding that they're taking on, as Adrian mentioned, the top of the show. And, likely, what is the second one down from a king? Like, it's not. Is it a prince?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to even compare them, right? Because Active Directory does so many different things. It's got tentacles into so many things. It's so embedded within Windows, and it's hard to challenge that. But one of the nice things about Jump Cloud is that they started off with the benefit of hindsight. And, knowing most networks aren't 100% Windows, so they built it as something that could be cross-platform as well, and built some additional functionality into it that you don't find with Active Directory, or isn't easy with Active Directory.
So it could be that Jump Cloud is not trying to displace a category king, but trying to create its own category too. I kind of see a little bit of that at play too, that, the most successful products, in my opinion, right, are ones that have created brand new categories. And I think that the crowned winner of that is Steve Jobs with the iPod, the iPad, and the iPhone. Really created three new categories, and it's pretty rare for a company to be able to create three new categories and dominate all of them.
So on this particular one, though, the question I have is that if we consider Active Directory as a technology that everybody's using, or as the category king, why are the very young, very nascent companies that are up and coming not touching it? Like Jupiter One doesn't use it. We don't use Active Directory. At least I don't think we do.
Because it's horrible.
Well, right. But I think the point that's brought up around that is, so innovation can disrupt, and then a network effect is typically required for disruption of a true category king. And in the place of AD, I think Microsoft has missed the opportunity where they could have said, look, it's not just about managing the identity within your enterprise, but look, let me give you single sign-on everywhere in every system. And I think that's where, like, Google and others, Google in particular, has a chance to overthrow AD someday, right? Someday. I don't think it's anytime soon, but someday.
And I think some of the trends we've seen, Microsoft has participated in some of these trends where they've kind of removed some of the necessity of why AD would have been so important, why you would have put that in. So, SaaS certainly